Hello and welcome. You're viewing the Citizens Journalist podcast, Mesa County Compass, that brings you the news that you can use from a different point of view. I'm Ruth.
I'm Lisa.
And together we are Mesa County Compass. Our goal is to create an informed, current, active citizenry armed with the facts. We will be covering what's new to you, what it means to you, what you can do about it, and provide you access to the decision makers when we can. Afternoon. We're here with Mesa County Compass, and this afternoon we have Shanon Secrest with us, who is actually a realtor, a builder, and he is on the Planning Commission for Grand Junction, and we would like to hear a little bit about what he can present to us. Shanon, would you give us a little detail about yourself and everything? And welcome, by the way.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year. It's
New Year to you.
2025, and it's still, just like writing it down for the first couple of weeks, it's hard to say.
It is.
But no, thanks for having me on. And I've listened to your podcast before, specifically the one with Keith Ellers. Extremely informative, and it's always nice to hear from him because I did serve with him for several years on the Planning Commission. Wealth of knowledge, and hopefully I can do just as good a job for you today as he did. But like you said, I've spent the last decade plus as a real estate broker, and then started to branch out and kind of diversify and started building residential homes. We've had some success doing that. So it seems like sometimes my focus gets shifted in that direction. And then in 2020, 2021, right around there, I had the opportunity to interview per se for the Planning Commission, and fortunately I was able to get on, and it went from being an alternate to get thrown in the fire pretty quickly. So I've learned a tremendous amount, and I'm honored to have the position, and I've learned so much, both good and bad.
Mm-hmm. So would you recommend that people serve on boards and serve on commissions? How important is that, do you think?
Yeah, so people in Grand Junction specifically, and I'll just keep it really focused on the city for now. There's so much to get engaged with, whether or not that be on a commission level, and even those that are brave enough to run for city council. I couldn't recommend it that enough, especially right now because we are headed into an election season this spring. So I really encourage people to do that, but also there's so many committees to be involved with. So whether or not you're a shareholder or you're part of a committee, a steering committee, or anything that you can do to make sure your voice is heard, as well as those folks that you might be really representing, like a certain group. We have some extremely knowledgeable people that advocate for multiple different viewpoints, for sure. So, yeah, I always recommend people get involved.
And do you think it's overly time consuming? Because I think most people think, well, I can't because I don't have time.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the committee. And as far as the Planning Commission, we have a workshop on Thursday, every other Thursday, and then every other Tuesday we have our meetings. And I would have to say, on top of that, definitely just being informed, read up, ask questions. I know I'm going to pick on Cody, with the current council member we have at the city. He does a really great job. I mean, it's one of those things that we applaud him for, is because he kind of goes above and beyond. He goes out and talks to people of the community. He's definitely putting in some really good time. But does it require that much? I would have to say probably not as much as he's putting in. However, if you serve on the commission, you get a free lunch.
Oh, there you go.
Can't beat that for sure. Just out of curiosity, if you're on the Planning Commission, you have your workshops and then you have your meetings. Is there any potential for any outsider to speak?
Yeah, not at the workshop in itself. So, typically at a workshop, the staff is preparing us for what is coming up. And so even at that time, it gives us an opportunity to ask questions, some clarity aspect, or presentation for those that have really been paying any attention to what's going on at the commission level or city council. Right. We've spent 2 years, a very active 2 years, with updates, whether or not that be code or the ped and bike plan or the comprehensive plan, going through that. So we've had a very active 2 years, and we will generally, in that case, we're listening to a consultant group out of Boulder, and we listen to their presentation. So it gives you an opportunity to absorb a lot of what's going on, even if that means kind of biting your tongue until it bleeds a little bit. So, yeah.
I'm trying to absorb all that.
Yeah. I mean, it is. There is so much going on. I mean, I can just go down the list of things, everything from that talking about tree canopy a couple years ago, and for those that are listening to the podcast that may not understand, essentially you got guiding documents and then you got codified documents, so things that like code, so and then how all those have a relationship, right? Because you're going to hear a ton from the city in regards to, well, the community spoke out, and this is what they want, and this is in the comprehensive plan, and so that's the guiding document that essentially guides code. Now, trust me, there's multiple viewpoints on who's driving the bus there, and then the disagreements that come with, well, yeah, sure, we did have a community outreach program, or maybe some open houses that allowed the community to speak, but we do have some stuff going on right now, and maybe you bring up 4th and 5th Street during this this time during this time we have, but those are kind of one of those things that and somebody's going to definitely fact check me here, but you might have 12 people that gave their input, and that is quote unquote the community spoke, or the ped and bike plan, or somebody with maybe city staff, they said, look, this is what we want to see, and the community spoke, and of course they can justify it based upon the comprehensive
They
plan.
always can, but the problem with that is that they did not announce properly these kind of meetings that they have. They have pop-ups, and pop-ups aren't going to catch the public that needs to hear this.
Yeah, and I think your comment is a much broader comment than 4th and 5th Street, right? That's kind of the hot topic for right now, because it has gained so much public attention.
But there are others.
But there are others, and we do hear that quite a bit. So, and I only mention this because when you have a code update and you put in so much time, typically those that actually show up to a meeting. And I'm talking about people of the public that show up to our Tuesday meetings. When they have the opportunity to speak. I mean, don't be afraid to show up, because there are times that I do have my opinion, and I'm speaking here as a commissioner. I have an opinion of the matter, but is my opinion. I got to be careful, because I want to make sure I'm representing the public, right? I'm representing
as it should be,
as those that live in our community, the shareholders that have something to say, and there's other things that we can get into here. But I just want to make sure that it's not I'm not a fan of 4th and 5th Street, for me personally. However, if I live in a community that is strongly believes in that kind of plan and that kind of process, then I have to say, look, the community spoke. In this case here, I just happen to represent or have the same belief that I do believe the majority of the people in Mesa County and Grand Junction feel that this wasn't the way that the city should have handled it. And again, I'm speaking on this specifically, but it really goes across the board on just about everything that we do as far as what I do on a city commission.
Right.
And we saw a lot of that complaint on 4th and 5th Street when 7th Street was brought to the board.
Yeah.
And people showed up in masses because we were able to catch that and get the word out. People, you must show up because the same thing's going to happen on 7th Street as it did on 4th and 5th. We didn't want that.
Yeah, and really that's kind of one of my things on the dais. I've said it multiple times. I want people to show up to those meetings because we just don't get a lot of, and I say we, the community, it doesn't get a lot of chances to speak out. No. And I get it. If it's it can get lost. There's a lot of minutia there, and you can get lost in the mix. However, do what you can to get engaged, because what it is that you have, and I don't want to kind of speak out of turn here, but you do have an ideology that's going on here. Whether or not that's people from city staff or maybe serve on certain committees, but it's not because of they don't have ill intent, right? They truly believe that this is the way a city is supposed to look, and there are certain people that don't believe that way at all. At the end of the day, the people that this community votes for and how our city staff is hired, they're going to essentially vote in the things and implement the policies that they feel like their community should look like. That's a scary thing, especially when you see how fast things can change in our community.
Yes. Very quickly, in fact.
Well, and it's one of those things, too. What you subsidize, you get more of. Mm-hmm. What you tax, you get less of.
Yeah.
And there are so many different little taxations, fees, things that people don't see, and you add all those together. We were looking at the sustainability and adaptation plan, for example, and it's, the move is we believe that the climate is in danger. Yeah. That's the basic thing of the sustainability and adaptation plan. So therefore, we're going to make all of these changes to make cars less easily used, so we can move you to using a bicycle. But we don't always look at, well, if we use solar, well, where did we get the solar panels from? Yeah. How do we dispose of the solar panels? We've got two different things going on. We don't want to have people have grass and water, but grass cools the temperature down, and it also is something that people need. They just psychologically need flowers and grass. That's why the downtown was made beautiful. People are attracted to that.
Sure.
So the problem is a lot of the things like taxing. So if we make it more expensive for you to come downtown, and we charge more on our parking meters, and we tell you we're doing this for you, you're not doing it for us.
Yeah.
So there's in all the codes and enforcements. I have a friend that owns a construction company, and they're saying the 2024 codes are so much more expensive. It prevents them from doing things.
Yeah. So I mean, the state. I'm going to hit on one thing. Mm-hmm. So let's look at what you'd said originally. So you have a cause and effect on everything that we do, right? And so I know that listening to the podcast a couple weeks ago, Keith mentioned this. But we had something come up here soon in regards to drive-throughs specifically. The code in itself, the code update, and the language used there encompass more than the drive-throughs. But I'm going to pick on the drive-through specifically. Well, when you have a surface area where you have complete separation of pedestrian and drive-through vehicle, then you have to expand the footprint of this. And in a lot of our workshops, I was pointing this out. So it's really difficult. A lot of the models that I've seen, and I got a little bit pushback from some city staff, but every model that I've seen, if you want to have two separate accesses, there's more space, and it's more impermeable space. So you're looking at drainage water, you're looking at all this stuff, right? And you said it before, it's like more heat, more grass means more water. And then so which way are you going to go there? My thing is like, let's make the smallest imprint that we can possibly have, which has the less impact on a business. Because you literally had, in this case here, it was McDonald's coming in, and I'm going to pick on them specifically because they had their representation was there, and you know, Starbucks could be in the mix, Taco Bell, so on and so forth. But in this case here, they're like, look, it's going to get to a point where it's not cost effective for us to come in.
Right.
So as a city, you'd have to say, well, I'm going to fall on the sword of this because of the impact that it could have, somebody coming off the sidewalk into the business, right? How many people do you think that could be? Right?
I think zero, but
is it a big enough impact for us to potentially lose businesses to come into Grand Junction?
It really isn't.
And the additional revenue. Yeah. So that's how I look at stuff. It's like the cause and effect. So going back to your comment about builders, because that part that I just mentioned was me kind of digesting everything as a planning commissioner with the city of Grand Junction. Now, personally, both personal and business, I guess, I build homes, and I look at the homes that I build specifically, and maybe what other companies build, where it has a bigger impact on some folks than it has on others. I don't build that. I'm going to use the word entry level, which as a broker, I hate the word entry level because there's nothing entry level cost about it.
Yes, exactly.
It is completely unaffordable. And I want to talk about that a little bit more.
That's something I want to talk about too.
Because of the impacts that it has on our community and kind of the trends that I've seen really since 2016, 17. So going back to the expense, it just the new code it puts builders that are building the entry level in a position where it becomes more and more unaffordable. Okay, and so it's not only the new code. I have all these conversations often in regards to like when is housing become more affordable? You know, as a broker, we have those kind of conversations because inventory, increasing inventory, but then you got a market condition where maybe the inventory goes up and the cost of homes are supposed to go down, but then we got labor, we got materials, all that stuff is not going to be any more or any less expensive. I should say.
It used to be the ebb and flow. We used to have that. It isn't anymore.
Well, no, and then so when you start talking about things that again, a popular conversation right now is the increased impact fees that we could potentially be seeing here soon. I build houses in that 700 range on up, and my margins are awfully tight. They're super, super tight, and I always express to people like it's death by 1,000 cuts,
right? Because
it's not any one thing.
Yeah,
but it doesn't matter if you're building a $400,000 house or a $700,000 house. Your margins are roughly about the same. So when you start talking about the world that I live in, which is an Excel spreadsheet, it doesn't get any more simple than that. And my banks look at the same thing. Builders don't drive the market. The market drives the builders,
right?
Because my banks look at, okay, well, you want to build a house and here's your budget sheet, and we're going to hire our appraiser to go out there and take a look at it. I have to meet the criteria of what the market is needing me to meet, right? And so I guess to kind of bring this in is that when you start increasing code costs, costs because of code,
right?
And then you start increasing, the the requirements that the city has on developers, and you start increasing lot costs because of that, and then you start increasing impact fees. So we're talking about my average house right now, a 2,400 square foot house costs me about $16,000 in impact fees. And so we're talking about an increase. Again, somebody could fact check me here, but we could be looking at a substantial increase. We're talking about 2-3 times that cost. And again, we got to look at kind of what's coming down the pipeline. I know that, a good resource for me would be like, Kelly Maves. She's a person I'd call and super engaged there as a planning commissioner. Going back to that they used to allow us. That's really bringing that back too. That's really the whole reason why I got involved in the first place, is because that's when they implemented the last time, and they had a 5-year scale, right? They implemented the increase, and every year it was going up more and more. Well, you look at my term, that's when I started saying, hey, look, the planning commission needs to have representation or somebody to speak for that community. And somebody that's knowledgeable enough to say, hey, look, this is what the cause and effect is every time we increase costs. So again, going back to saying, look, I look at it as simply as what my spreadsheet looks like. And when almost every line item is more expensive and it's in the red than it was the time before that I built a similar house, we have a problem. And the problem comes into the fact that it just doesn't seem like there's no checks and balances in regards to what's going on, because the city uses terms like, oh, builders need to pay their own way. Right? Well,
but.
Yeah.
So in terms of that, builders needing to pay their own way, part of, and I don't have the numbers, but part of me says, if the city gets revenue from 2 sources, they get it from property tax, and they also get it from sales tax. So if I build a new home that somebody's occupying, I am going to get some money that the homeowner is paying for part of that. So I would think that you could take off some of the impact fees because you've got somebody actually paying for part of that.
Let's look at
paying
this.
Their way.
Yeah, let's look at this a couple different ways, right? So let's go back from the conception of dirt, right? So developer goes in, and they're required by the city to put in all the utility.
Right.
The utility then the utility costs are collected by the city. So the developer is putting in all the utility for the city, and then builders are then asked, okay, so you got your other terms like arterials and major collectors and all that and I use that because we're looking at the development, but then what is the developer required to do outside of that, right?
Exactly.
And all I would encourage people to do is a conversation that we've been having is look at the requirements that the city is putting on. And again, I'm not going to say any more than this, but when you look at Costco, for example, see what it would cost Costco to come in, and then not just their building, but everything outside of that. It is substantial costs.
Yes.
Okay, but then the little guy like myself or the developer that's doing 50 lots, 40 lots, what's required for them? Sometimes it's connector bridges, sometimes it's other stuff that is like, whoa, this is way over the scope of what we had budgeted for.
Yes.
But why are we required to do this on connectivity? This is my land. And yet we're told you have to do this. And that to me is a problem. But specifically looking at costs here, everything is more expensive, right? That's the trend.
That's the inflation thing.
And so actually you had another comment there that I wanted to follow up on. It was a last.
Oh, good. He looks at me like I'm going to remember.
So
I have a cold.
No. It was because there was multiple things.
It's the fact that the city is taking in money, like you said, from the utilities and from from sales tax.
Yeah. Okay. So
They're spending the money somewhere else rather than doing that.
okay. So that becomes that becomes one of my points that I like making the most. So in the end of April, the Supreme Court had ruled that impact fees were unconstitutional. It was Sheets versus El Dorado in California, right? So for those listening to the podcast, please look it up because there's tons of information on it because there's really two different case studies. And then there's studies when you go to implement impact fees of studies that are required, right?
Right.
So in this particular case, this guy retired and he owned the land. He was wanting to put a modular home on the land that he owned, went into the county, or excuse me, his city to pay for the permits. And he didn't realize how expensive the permitting was because of the impact fee, right? So he actually paid it but thankfully he didn't let it go. It went through every tier of the court system and ended up in the Supreme Court. It unanimously passed the Supreme Court unanimously passed that impact fees are unconstitutional. And not only did they have to give him back his money, but they have to give him back with interest after 4 or 5 years. So it was a pretty substantial.
Pretty hefty chunk.
So it was. Amy Comey Barrett wrote the opinion, all right? And then the ripple effect after we heard this was, oh my gosh, this is going to be huge. There's going to be a huge repercussion because of this. And then all of a sudden it went dark. Nothing happened. And then not only looking at our city specifically, but the conversations that I had was, well, we don't see how that ruling impacts what we do. And we just don't necessarily agree with the ruling.
Oh, good.
Okay.
So we don't have to follow it.
So that's the comments that I've received. And then the comments that I've received was essentially, well, we don't really agree with that, and this is how it's different. And here comes a whole new taxation, and we know what that is.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And so and next thing you know, something else shows up because of the homeless housing situation, or I shouldn't say homeless housing because that's so on PC. It's the interim housing or whatever name you want to put on that. But bottom line is there's a whole new fee involved in what now it costs me.
Right.
So again,
linkage fee.
The linkage fee, correct. And so not only does it impact me as a builder, but it's going to impact businesses that are coming or could potentially be coming into Grand Junction, the drivers, right? And so we're creating an environment, and this is my opinion. I hope I'm wrong, but we're creating an environment of unaffordability.
Yes.
If we're not already there.
We're already there.
And so, you got, the boulders, the mountain towns that implement these things, and we're like, wow, it's putting us in a situation where, as a broker, and I mentioned beginning of the podcast, 2016, 2017, when you could buy a house for $235,000, new construction, 1,700 square foot.
Beautiful little starter home.
Right.
Something like that, and for those that are listening to podcasts, look at Heritage Heights, for example. Like really good homes, really great homes. And you could get into that situation in 2016. Now those homes are twice as much to build them on replacement cost. You can't do that either because what it would take to develop. And so that's where I'm saying I just think we're at a real crossroads here coming up, and where we have some decisions to make on a city council level, where I hope the community speaks out, because we've talked about this before. The numbers of those that actually show up to vote is pretty upsetting.
Well, and I think that when you were saying this earlier, Shannon, people need to come. I looked through the agendas of things. We had met with Trent Prawl.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations that we had is, I said, this Urban Trails Committee, this is where a lot of the PED stuff came from. And I'm going, well, I didn't even know, one, that it existed, and two, the impact that it had. And I said, I thought it was just about, urban trails, like going out on a lunch loop. And he goes, well, what do you think the urban part meant? And I thought, I don't know, but I think it's your job to inform. And people, when they see what's on, the titles of it don't tell you what it's about.
Yeah.
And
but
you
it's
don't
deliberate.
Know.
It's deliberate.
And it's not, it's too much information.
Yeah, I mean, it's, so I digest this in multiple different ways too, because if you're adamant about biking and that you're passionate about the urban trails and all these committees, and you're serving on those, that's fantastic. You're going to show up, your voice is going to be heard. But for the average person that goes back and forth to work every day, that has essentially had to commit to putting gas in their vehicles when it's been very expensive, they're not doing that because they just love it. They're doing that out of necessity, because they got they got a very busy day. They got maybe kids at school or lives that they're running around. So they wake up in the morning, they're making a conscious effort to figure their day out and drive and get the kids to sports events. I mean, can you imagine, like, for just a minute that we live in a community that doesn't allow us to move in transport like we do now. And right now we live in a community that is prioritizing and making it more difficult for mobility. And they trust me, they could flip that on their head and say, well, regardless if you're in a vehicle, mobility is just more than that. And I don't disagree with that. And I want a safe community. I want to make sure everybody can move. But when you're intentionally making things more and more difficult for those that are transporting via automobile, can you really tell me that there isn't some type of ideology there that we're leaning
or maybe
towards?
Not even an ideology, an agenda. I'm going to put it down in concrete.
Yeah. Well, it's very intentional, right?
Very intentional.
The intentionality is there. And our community has to speak and say, hey, look, is this the direction we want to go? Right. And we have to do it. We have to do it at a city council level, because those are the folks that are making the decisions.
Right.
I look at it this way, it seems like our society here in Grand Junction is moving towards anybody 50 and lower. Those 50 and older are not considered. And there's a lot of us here in this valley that are. I mean, a handicap, you've got all kinds of different disabilities that you cannot use a bike, you can't use a scooter, you can't always get on a bus.
Yeah.
Well, and in terms of housing too, we're working with a homeless situation and saying we need to subsidize that, and people that have huge incomes, but the median income for a family of four in Grand Junction is $68,000. That's not enough for a house, and so the people that are making it, but not low and not high, are being squeezed out.
Well, so I've made a similar point, and if anybody catches wind of this, it is what it is. But that argument, right, in the increased cost of housing, I've heard an argument at a city level that's saying, look, if we can, even though cost of housing has gone up, if we can make it more accessible, the word I'll use accessible, more accessible for you to ride a bike and to get around, that means you don't need two cars as a family. That means we've actually decreased your household expenses, because now you can only have one car, you don't need two.
But you're telling me what I can have.
That is
wrong.
That is the argument there, and that's where that comment's been made, and again you're like, oof. That's very difficult, because today I had my kids are out of school, so
Right.
I had a wife that had a doctor's appointment this morning. I had a daughter that was going to get air, and then another one that's going to the Riverside skating rink deal, and all that was happening within probably 3 hours of each other.
Exactly.
And it would have been a very difficult day on a bicycle when
Right.
it's 30 degrees.
Right.
And just having my 10-year-old jump on the handlebars and go for it. So
Yeah, right.
it's like, kind of wishing one hand and the other. And it's like, look, sometimes just out of accessibility, I'm very fortunate that I live in a community where I could have 2 vehicles.
Well, and it's almost a necessity. Some retired people, I know retired people that have said, we tried one vehicle, it doesn't work for us either.
Yeah.
We've got too many different things
Yeah.
that we need to do
Yeah.
that are going on. But beyond that too, even in the housing, where you can only afford a very small house, it's a kind of a theory that what you're creating too is young professionals that maybe are going to be childless.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have no children coming into the community to continue to support it, what are you going to do with that too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think they've already kind of proven that on, this, and I don't want to open up another can of worms here, but on school closure.
Mm-hmm.
They're not doing that for any other reason than
They don't have the people.
the attendance is going down.
Right.
And so we also take a look at that. We take a look at that on the type of homes we're building,
Exactly.
right? On a kind of a speculative process. So, it's just interesting where, and I've said this multiple times, but just interesting on where we go as a community
Right.
and what this community looks like 5-10 years from now.
And who you're attracting, because I know that out in Fruita, they have next to some friends of ours, they're building a tiny home subdivision.
Mm-hmm.
But you're telling me that you don't need more than a tiny home. That's all you need.
Yeah.
That's telling you again
Yeah.
what you want and what you need are two
Yeah.
different
Well,
things.
yeah, and it's
And
my,
it's not
yeah.
and it's not 7 people's
Right.
job.
And I agree with that 100%. Because for me, I look at it like, what kind of product am I going to build, and what's going to be out there to meet the demand of the community. Mm-hmm. Now, 11 or 12 times in the comprehensive plan, by the way, affordability and attainability is mentioned. Like those 2 words both are mentioned 11, 12 times. On a state level, and on a local level, what is the city doing? What is the city doing specifically to
Decrease the cost.
What are they doing to encourage the decrease in costs? And there is nothing there that tells me that they're making the steps. If they're going to fall on the sword of, hey, well, the community spoke, and this is the comprehensive plan, and this is what they want to see. Well, back it up. Because so far right now, when you're talking about increased fees and making it more difficult and builders and developers need to pay their own way, what are you doing besides just assuming that we're going to eat those costs when we don't have the margins to eat those costs? What are you doing to make things more affordable and attainable?
And then you go back to 4th and 5th Street again.
Well,
with the changes they want to make there, that is another $4 million plus that they're going to pour into something that nobody wants.
well, and I think there might be. Let's look at, for just the sake of podcast and conversation, let's look at what the responsibilities are of the city, like of government in itself, right? So you could say, okay, well, on 4th and 5th Street, it is a city. It's a city road. They per se have the right to do what they want to do to it, but yet they need to answer to the citizens of our community and saying, well, one, we've budgeted for this, and we have a really good feel of what the community needs, but they didn't do that. One, we don't have the money. I mean, drive around, look at our roads, look at G Road. And you can even go back and look at the impact fees, and I want to make another comment about that. It just seems like that's a major topic of this, but I want to pick on that for a minute because I want to talk about roads specifically. But my thing is, like, we could be doing a lot of other road improvements right now without focusing on this this huge cost of putting in bike lanes or accessibility access points. When if you go down there and sit down there wasn't a single study done prior to those going in. And so this was done pretty quick, and the city has had an answer to some super massive pushback because it is super unpopular. So you could say that, and then you could have your gripe there. I'm going to take it a step further than that. Is when did the city, specifically, I'll pick on the city of Grand Junction, when did governments decide to get into the speculative real estate business?
Right on.
Because it seems like we've done that a lot lately, and especially in Grand Junction, and it doesn't matter if it's Las Colonias and that corridor, or like, I get it if you're writing grants and stuff, trying to, maybe give money, because they do subsidize the Catholic Church a little bit in regards to giving them some money and some nonprofits to encourage them to provide services. And
but it's a pittance.
But I'll still say, hey, look, if that's what the city has planned, but why is it the city's job now to get into real estate? And here's my thing. So a few months ago, we were sitting in a workshop, and this is by far, public now, but we were sitting in a workshop, and one of the staff employees kept on using the terms like we. Well, what we were doing was we were talking about specific code outside of the code we currently have, but recreating a specific code that allowed short-term housing. So there was a criteria of density, listen to the fire department and police department, and then what was their requirements as well as the density. And so what this was is all the tough sheds, and then stacking those in there, and then how many would we allow per square foot or the area. So the driving force there is to, like, we pass this code specifically for this, and then nonprofits come in, and then they submit the application. They submit the application to develop out this type of product, and then it's good for a couple of years, and then they resubmit an application that's good for another couple of years after that. So in with the expectation that this was going to allow for more short-term the unhoused needs. Okay, that's what we were there for. But it really sounded like to me that we could sit there and say, well, the nonprofits don't really have the money to do this. Like, right. There's no money for them, so the likelihood of this happening is not great. Shortly after that, the linkage fee conversation starts coming into play.
Right.
When we were told that the city is not, we might allocate land or do it, but now there's a linkage fee comes in here. So is that the we? Like, I don't have the answer to this, but it makes me ask questions. And I think that's what's really important about these kinds of podcasts is we have to get engaged. We have to start asking the right questions. And as a community, is this the direction that we want to go? Whether or not it's 4th and 5th Street, 7th Street, or every other street that goes down Horizon Drive that they want to make one lane.
Right, right.
Or is it a conversation of like, is this the direction we want to go? Here personally, I have to say, just because it's a gripe, my thing is, if we start offering so much to the unhoused needs, what do you think is going to attract in this area? And here's the other thing. I've said in enough workshops, these areas, right? These little developments that we were passing, a lot of folks don't want them because they're required to stay clean. They're required to not drink. They're required to get a job. So really, at the end of the day, is it really going to fit a need, the necessity for our community?
There's still going to be camping on the river. There's still be camping on the desert. There's by the railroad, everywhere, but in the housing that we are trying to provide.
But I really encourage people that are watching this podcast, like, ask those questions. Like, I look, and I can't say one of my best attributes is empathy, because I mean I'm a kind of the bootstraps kind of person. Like you got to pick yourself up sometimes, and I know it's not easy for everybody. I get it.
No.
However, I just think sometimes when you've allowed your community to turn into that, what is that? What does that say? And that's maybe on a personal level, that's a concern of mine. So I'm going to go and go back to impact fee real quick, because I have these random thoughts, so the studies that they do on impact fee is the impact fee that is used is supposed to go to a very specific area around the development that you develop. So if I pay that $16,000, some of it's divvied out towards other things, sewer tap, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But you got to look at what the amount that goes for that's supposed to go towards road improvements, everything like that. So I'm going to pick on the last few developments that I've been in the Redlands specifically, and then the Highlander off of G Road and 27 Road.
Yes.
Right? So I know that the city has some concepts, and they're wanting to redo like a roundabout right there at Horizon Drive. Okay, great. They've had that budgeted. But I look at just the development that has gone around there before. I don't have the numbers, but I'm assuming that the LDS church, unless they're exempt for some reason, that the temple that just went up had to pay some type of impact fee. And if they didn't, it wasn't big enough news for me to not know about it. And so then you look at all the houses that have gone in at Highlander subdivision, as well as Village Square, that comes around. I look at the roundabout at basically 12th Street, which is 27 Road. It looks the hell. It doesn't look very good. I look at the road improvements on Horizon Drive. I look at G Road. Nothing has happened there.
That's right.
So sometimes you got to say, okay, where did the money go? I would really strongly suggest people fact check me here and look at where that money went. But I'm assuming that money went towards 24 Road on the improvements made there.
Right. So when you're saying people need to fact check you, how would they do that?
Well, that's a super good question, because I feel like I'm as engaged as I could be. Is like, can you get the city to open up the books, or can you ask staff to say, hey, look, where are the funds going here? Where the funds that were used for this particular development? And if I'm a neighboring property, say on Tillman there, like, why wouldn't I want to ask that question? Saying, hey, look, all these houses that were in here, right? They paid an impact fee, and you could make the case that the roads were nicer before they moved in.
Right.
Like, so I've put up with this mess. Are the roads really better off? Am I better off as a community? Because there are cases when we're looking at a new development and a rezone where people come in. And that is when, because really nobody cares about code. Like, we didn't have anybody coming in and speaking out against code unless you're maybe a stakeholder or somebody that is going to get financially impacted by this. But most of the time on the planning commission, people are coming in because they've lived in this house for so many years, and they're really against this development because they're going to lose the deer that are in the area.
The view.
Right.
And it's like, well, unfortunately, things change. And that's one thing that you got to look at, is change is inevitable.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And if
we are growing.
Well, and if somebody wants to do that to their property and it meets code and it meets the requirements set on zoning and everything else, then they have the right to develop their piece of land that they want to. And then you got to say, well, I'm really sorry you're going to lose your view. It's just, but hey, that's somebody else's land, and
You've just been lucky.
It's zoned for that, and they just haven't developed it until this point. So I don't know. I mean, that's a kind of another aspect there too. But
I think the main thing that people see what's happening, but they're not sure where to go. And
Yeah.
say, I see, like you said, that the roads are not being improved. That roundabout that you're talking about was the first ones that went in, and it wasn't big enough. And so you're going, this should be maintained with some money that you're taking in.
Sure it is.
But they don't know, well, who would we go and complain to?
Yep. I
I
mean,
mean, they just don't know.
I don't
they
know.
complain to each other.
I used to have a coach when I was really young. He'd let common sense prevail. And I just feel like we've allowed, like, instead of having a checks and balances system saying, hey, look, we're going to charge this fee, but it has to be used to the area that's been impacted the most by this development.
Exactly.
And I could almost then justify if that intersection looked beautiful, that roundabout where the curbing wasn't falling apart and the road system. I mean, I literally hit a pothole because I'm on that roundabout every day. I mean, not only is the development that I'm building in right there, but my kids, that's the direct point between my kids' school to home. And I hit this pothole every day for 2 weeks, and I guarantee it caused damage because I had a big truck at the time. So I guarantee it caused damage to somebody's vehicle. And the whole time I'm thinking, how unfortunate is this that I'm seeing basically this beautiful new structure, this temple, as well as a subdivision that the average house cost is well over $700, and I'm looking at like curbing that is falling and deteriorating, and it doesn't look good. And
Besides
this
being
is
too narrow.
And this is where my money is supposed to go.
Right.
And to me, if I'm thinking about the common sense of impact fee, the area that's impacted the most by a particular development, I want this intersection to shine like a diamond, or Horizon Drive. I don't want potholes. I don't want stuff. And the city spoke out. There's things undergrounding and other things that we feel like we've, the shareholders feel like they kind of want a little bit. But my thing is like, why haven't we done better?
Right.
Why haven't we done better?
Right.
We're taking in enough money, we should be able to.
Right.
Yeah.
But we need 36.4 more million.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, anything else?
Well, no. Again, I just, thank you for doing a podcast like this, because, again, any tool that we have as a community to get the word out and to encourage people to show up, speak out.
And what time are your planning committee meetings?
Yeah, planning commission meetings are 5:30. So I encourage people to go to gjspeaks.org. And that's how they find out agenda items. That's how they find out notes. If there is a topic that you're passionate about, you got public comment. So you can write on public comment. You can log in and speak from home. We have the ability there, or you can show up to the meetings. All those, I can assure you, you're going to be heard. As far as a planning commissioner, from a planning commissioner. And city staff. Oh gosh. And then, really outside of that, just be engaged, be in the know of what's going on. And for goodness sakes, like, vote this spring. And you got to vote for people that, are definitely like-minded, because we talked about this before. There's outside money and outside resources that are coming in and that are really going to promote their guy or gal. And if you're not really happy about what's going on 4th and 5th Street, and that's not the direction that you want to see your community go in, then please vote for the candidate that is like-minded and going to be serving your best interests. And
Once again, that website was gjspeaks.org.
Right.
yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, you've been
Thank you,
watching. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry. You've been watching Mesa County Compass. This is the truth as we see it, the facts as we know them. You decide.
Thank you.
Thanks.